Welcome to Middle Fingers Up, the show where we hold our heads high and our middle fingers higher. I'm your host, Kieran McKay. Today I'm thrilled to introduce Meg Khan, the creative force behind Seeing the Stories project, born from a deep belief in the power of visibility and connection. Our guest, a visionary storyteller, has journeyed from personal loss to profound discovery using photography as a medium to amplify voices often sidelined by mainstream narratives. Through her lens, through her work, she invites us to witness the rich diversity of human experience, breaking down barriers and fostering learning and understanding. I am so excited to welcome Meg. Thank you so much for being here today, all the way from London. So glad that we could have this conversation.
Thank you so much. What a great introduction. I might have to take those words from you and put them in my bio instead.
Well, you know, this is why I always want our guests to hear the intro, because I want you to know what it means to us over here that A, you're taking the time, you're giving us the time to sit here and have this conversation. And B, like, that's inspiration talking when I get to look you up, when I get to follow you, when I get to learn about all the humans, all the people that you are featuring. And, you know, they all have so many stories. We all have those. And the way that you go about and sharing them is very touching. So I'm glad that you felt that way, because I feel like you're doing just that, amplifying voices that are forgotten or never told, or I would imagine individuals themselves think, who would want to know about me? And yet they have such a tale to tell.
Yeah, I mean, you'll be surprised how many people have said exactly those words. I don't have a story to share. And as you said, each and every one of us do a whole selection. Our lives are enriched by our own stories on a daily basis. So, yeah, it's a very, very lovely opportunity to be here this afternoon for me, probably early morning for you, to have this conversation. So thank you so much for your interest in my work. I'm honestly humbled when someone wants to know more. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, I'm glad that we're able to do this. I think we should start out with a shout out to Bhavin Badresa from Suche Art.
Absolutely.
Who, in his own way, connected us. That's how we found each other. You're a dear friend of his. I had the opportunity of interviewing him and feel like I made a friend in the process. And that's sort of how you and I connected. And that's the beauty of storytelling. You don't know who you're going to find along the way. It's such a cool journey and adventure. And you and I have sort of touched base in the last 8-9 months about your work, my work. You've had some really cool accomplishments along the way, and just, you know, cheering each other on. And I think it's fantastic that you have a wonderful community network that can connect us. And here we are today, finally being able to learn about your story, which is what, is that common for you? Do you share your story? Do you get out there and talk about you?
It's funny. In the last few months, there's been a couple of requests. Again, very humbling for me to kind of stand in front of a few people and share a little bit more. For me, it's always been about the stories I want to share of others. But you learn more and more when you are a creative in this nature that actually your story is just as important to get out there, because people are giving away a part of themselves. So I can't expect that without actually reciprocating in my own small way that I can. So yeah, I've had some incredible opportunities recently to stand on small stages, but share a little bit more of where this has all come from and why I feel so strong about what it is that I'm doing.
Well, I'm looking forward to us getting into that and learning more about what it is that you are doing. So before we talk about Seeing the Stories, whenever we have storytellers on our podcast, for me, I'm always curious about, there has to be a story itself, or a way a story was told to you, where the way you heard it, saw it, felt it, that would, you know, bring you to want to be a storyteller. So I'm curious, was there like a first story you remember experiencing, or an impactful one that was conveyed to you, and has that story sort of helped spark your interest in storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, while you're saying that, I can see the image of one person, and that is my father. I remember being very, very young and being in the living room, whether he was with a few friends or a room full of people, he had everyone wrapped around his little finger because he was such a great storyteller. And, you know, even as a 5, 6, 7-year-old, having a mixture of languages while he was speaking and telling these stories, some of which I didn't even understand. I was just engaged by how he could share so much. So he was the first storyteller that I really, really looked up to. And then I can honestly say within the first 5 or 10 stories, part of seeing the stories, they were all incredibly inspiring, because it was like, okay, there's something in this, which kind of domino effect to the hundreds that came after. So yeah, definitely.
Oh, that's amazing. So a big shout out to your father who sparked that in you. Let's talk a little bit about seeing the stories in just the word seen. I want to start with that. That's a very powerful word that you used and that you are using with your project. And so I want to know from you, like, how would you describe the sensation or emotion of being seen? Like, how would you explain that to people, what it means to be seen? What does that mean to you personally?
I think to me personally, it again comes from a nod from, you know, I'm first generation. And if you stand me and my 4 sisters, we have a brother, he gets lost in amongst us somewhere. But if you stand me and my sisters in a line, we're all incredibly different and have been from a very, very young age. And I think with my parents coming here in their 30s, coming into a completely, I mean, I have we have family from Iran, Afghanistan and Pakistan, but my parents were born in Pakistan and decided to come over here. So to be seen, what that initially means to me is that my parents, and mostly my father, was able to see that his 4 daughters were really quite different. And to be seen, I think in its purest sense, means that you can be who you need to be. That someone who is looking at you is saying, it's all cool, do what you need to. And whether that translates into being a tomboy, whether that translates into loving makeup as a kid, or running in the garden for ages, or being a 43-year-old who likes whatever, I think at the true essence is just that it's cool to be who you are. I can see that and carry on. And that's hugely powerful. I mean, I can say it in a few words, but there is a real magic and empowering feeling in that exchange between 2 people in that given moment.
Oh, that's so well said.
And it still makes me emotional talking about it. It's really powerful. Yeah.
No, and how can it not? I know I'm sitting here with goosebumps too. Like, you know, you talk about your family, a lot of your roots, our heritage. These are things that really connect us to where we are in our journey, especially as we're in our 40s. You and I are the same age, so you're probably in a if we're in a similar boat, that's reflection period, looking back, right, as we're figuring out how to move forward. And I can really appreciate what you're saying about, especially also as an Indian father, having 4 daughters. There's so much more to that as well. You know, lot of us grow up, a lot of girls grow up in our culture, maybe feeling being seen was just not possible. You know, the boys come first, all these things. And, you know, the way you speak of your father, who's immigrating with your mother to a foreign land, and he's got these kids, like the journey for your mother and him as well to have to go through to figure out how do we figure out what we have to do, but also look after these kids and make sure, like you said, they're running through the gardens, doing the things that kids are supposed to be doing. So for people out there that maybe are like, man, I don't know if I've ever experienced what it's like to be seen. Like, what would you say to them that are listening?
That's a powerful question. I think in that respect, again, in my own experience being here for 43 years, is that if you're not feeling it, is to ask yourself whether you're giving that gift to others. And I think that's when it is given back. So I think there is a sensation of, as soon as you do it for others, they also then maybe see things a little bit differently, because they feel the magic or that feeling or the emotion or the empowerment of, actually, this individual sees me for who I am. And actually, it's quite a delicate thing at times. It's not as obvious as saying to someone, I see who you are and it's all cool and let's go for it. It's just it's a delicate acknowledgement. And sometimes in the work that I do through this project, it's about time shared. Two people sitting opposite each other and deciding to see one another, whether that's half an hour, it never is, or many hours later. That it's just, can you do that for others? And absolutely, it will come back to you.
Yeah. Well, that's well said. I think that's a great life lesson. Sometimes we're feeling, we're not getting the things that maybe we need, or we're not recognizing it, and we go into this micro bubble of whatever it is we're going through. And when we can step out and see the big picture, I think that's when we get to see some of that magic and see the good in people, maybe feel inspired or whatnot. But it's hard to kind of step out of that and get that bird's eye view. And I think that's a really good way to invite people to look at, if I'm not getting the things that I'm looking for, am I also putting them out there for others? And
an extension to that even would be through my work. I've seen that you begin to, once you start to see others a little bit more as an everyday thing, as part of your nature, what you begin to see is the abundance of the way in which life is lived.
Yeah.
So you don't then take away that narrow vision of how you live and how you should be is here, and no one is seeing me necessarily, but actually if you widen that and see, there's this way to live, and there's this way to be, and this way to kind of work or be creative. It's like, actually, I want to see even more. Yeah. So you open up a little bit more, and then it just becomes part of your little community, whether that's even within your own family or your neighbours. I can say with an absolute guarantee of 3.5 years later, you will start to do that queuing up in the coffee shop. It's an incredible thing that it's like you're peppering every environment that you're in to just say, let's have a chat. And it's extraordinary what you learn.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you might have found the secret to quality of life right there. It's, how do you really, really, I think, appreciate time and what we do with it. And sometimes we don't feel like we have time, or we got to dial the noise down. We're busy with all the wrong stuff. And I would imagine COVID, which was kind of around the time you sort of started this journey. Yeah. I would imagine that probably had a lot for all of us, a time for, we're still talking about how that helped us pause so many aspects of our life because we had no choice but to. Yeah. And have that noise dial down, and then you start to see a lot of what is it? What are these deeper connections I'm looking for versus these surface conversations we have? And I've seen a difference in people in my, circle saying, okay, we got to really really talk. We're not just having surface conversations. Like, what brings you joy instead of the, what do you do for work? And those, how was the weather? And would you say COVID was sort of like a turning point or a helpful moment for you as well?
It was absolutely the moment I decided to start this. I mean, I was one of those fortunate people being paid that I was doing because I was at home. I remember sitting on the balcony. Sun was coming in. It was actually a sunny March. So I had the sun on my face. And like you said, absolutely, we were forced to stop. And I've been very lucky that a few years before that, I had been working for myself anyway. So I had a sense of freedom of what it meant to kind of pave your own way. Yeah. But I was still tied down to, okay, I need a contract. I need to make sure I'm getting this, I'm earning this. And it forced me just to stop and say, what is it that I really, really want to be doing? And what is it that I haven't done? Or where is that idea that's kind of been sat at the back of my mind that I can now really kind of give some time to and get it going? I owe a lot to that moment of having those few months of reflection. Yeah. And like I said, I consider myself an extremely fortunate person to be able to say that, because there were many people that weren't in that position. Right. The stress of it all was way too high. But it was a pivotal moment, and it seems like it was just yesterday. It was the time and the space I needed to, like I said, really think about. And it is about being in your late 30s and 40s where you think, what did I do during my 20s? And I think that your 20s are very much about, who am I? 30s are, let's get a bit serious. Should I buy a place? Yeah. Should I be doing the adult stuff? And 40s are like, okay, let's get a bit real now. What is it that we really want to be doing? So yeah, COVID, thank you very much in the bizarrest way possible for coming along.
That's amazing. And I love the way that you put that in our 40s, because I'm with you with, what do we really want to be doing? Because some people will look at that 40s when we start to have these reflective moments as midlife crisis. And I always fight that. I'm like, this is like a second act. It's not necessarily a mid, so when the dude goes and buys that sports car, that analogy we've all sort of grown up with, I look at that dude in a different way. I'm like, he's probably been wondering all this time, when am I going to get that car? And he's realizing, if I don't do it now, I don't know when I'm going to do. So I don't know. To me, it is a second act, an opportunity to say, okay, what really matters? And so, like you said, some of us in some way can say we were fortunate during that lockdown to, I think, reprioritize what matters to us. And some of us had no choice because of health reasons and isolation and all that. But in the big picture, now looking back, I would say, that was a really helpful time for me, because I can tell that was sort of the beginning for me too, to get to where I'm at as well, of, okay, what kind of mom do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be? Is this really what I set out to do? Those moments where we can sit and ask ourselves these questions. And now we're back to the hustle bustle of busy world. And my husband and I were talking about this the other day, like, now we have to, in our time schedule, actually know reflective moments. Like, okay, I have to take an hour today to reflect, because here we are back to back appointments, back-to-back meetings. And that creativity that we were all longing for, and a lot of us found during COVID, I think it starts to get lost again, because we get caught up in the day-to-day stuff. So to me, creativity, which is what you're doing, I'm doing, a lot of our guests find their voice through that, I think plays a huge part in our identity, where we're going. What would you say your creativity has done for you?
I think it's actually freed me in a way that I've never felt before. I feel lighter in a way. And I think it's simply because for every person that has sat with me, and we're into the few hundreds now, I have learned another way to see life. I've seen another way to see grief, love, sadness, creativity, what you do for a living, being a parent, being a sibling, that's an extraordinary wealth of experiences that have filled my mind and my heart. I have laughed, I have cried, I've, felt passionate with these people when they're sharing their life experiences, their stories. And the creativity in me that is probably not necessarily, I think it's what you said, you kind of use the skill that you have to earn an income. It becomes the thing you do to put food on the table, to buy the car, to buy the whatever it is. And actually now it's become, if I keep doing this, I'm going to be able to live out the rest of however long I've got in a way that's going to be incredible. I'm going to be able to say that I have heard and seen, hopefully, thousands of stories by the time I take my last breath. And I will have seen these individuals and understood what life's richness is. And I think that's a huge statement to make, but I make that in the small world that I exist in, with the interactions that I'm having. And coming back to something that we've both just said is, when you're in your 20s and you are that person, you have your teenage years to kind of fall back on. Your 30s allow you to fall back on what you've done. Now I feel like I can fall back on everything that's come before. And now all the stories and all the experiences of the people I'm meeting, imagine what I can try to do moving forward in the next 10 or 20 years. And I'm kind of like cheating in a way, because I'm getting to hear all of these stories and experiences of how to do it and how not to do it. And more importantly than anything is shine a light to each one of those incredible people who give up their time and sit opposite me and share it. It's hugely moving. Every single time. The youngest person I've sat with is 10 years old, and the eldest has been 84. Wow. So how do you, I don't know, there must come a point where I've got to put these words, all of those words into some kind of, I don't know, toolkit and say, when I'm gone, look, learn from this. But I hope in people, what they see from my work is see the person in your life, see the stranger who sat next to you on the tube, and see what kind of interaction you can have. It's incredible.
That's very well said. I wonder, like, maybe you've grappled with this, maybe your clients have, but is there ever this tension between the desire for visibility to be seen, but then the fear of vulnerability that comes from being truly seen?
Yes, absolutely. Because the thing is I think the way I can explain that is I sit with someone which started off as friends and family because it was an idea. 95% of the time now it's a stranger, someone who I've possibly never met before. And there is a vulnerability straight away because they'll say yes, but there is the thing of, I don't have a story to share. But I sit with them for that period of time and I could never write their life story. What I'm hoping to share is in amongst what we have during that hour and what the conversation we have and the experiences that we share. The vulnerability is part of that. And the vulnerability and what they share is all part of that. But what I'm then sharing with the world is just an essence of, regardless of that vulnerability, which you don't need to know about because there is an element of privacy or challenge. I'm saying this person is still here doing this thing or doing their thing. What I've seen in them is bravery, or here's a list of accomplishments, or here's where they're going in the future, or they're just rocking. I mean, why not say it? They're just, mind my language, they're just fucking cool. And I want the world to see that they're just uber cool, because I think that is all I can do. I cannot write all of that into something that would be a credit to the vulnerability and everything that they've shared with me. People have shared things that they've said they've never said out loud, which is an extraordinarily safe space that we create for each other. I walk away from those experiences and take my phone straight away and write a whole selection of things down and think and trust that time that we've shared together. Because when I sit down to write those words, those feelings all come back. I hope that answers your question.
It's more than, like I can relate. Sometimes the guests that I have sitting before me and I'm speaking to, I talked a little bit about timing before we started recording because we were laughing about how long it's taken for us to get together. And, we said, you know what? Timing plays a part in storytelling. And sometimes I have guests like yourself that will sit here with me and will say something and I'm like, okay, how did you know that I was struggling with this? Or how did you know that in my head, how did you know that this is a very thing that I'm wondering about and you yourself have just brought it up? And I think the thing that I'm hearing you say is when we are truly present in someone's presence, we learn so much, not just about them, but also, humans, we're selfish, we're egotistical, so much in that about ourselves, in the way that you speak, the way that you say the things that leave us. And, there can be that negative effect too, that we have to be mindful of. I can leave you feeling crappy as well, but that's not what we're talking about. Most times when we have these being present moments with people, it's like a connection. And the best way that I had it told to me was we were at NASA out in Houston, Texas, took the kids for spring break and, walked into one of these little theaters and there was a movie playing. They're interviewing astronauts that were doing a space adventure. That's the best I can say. My kids would be so disappointed in me right now. But they're all being interviewed and they're all crying and separately saying, when you look at the Earth from where we are, everything is connected. Water, land, there are no individuals. You can't see specks of individuals. We are all connected. And I'm just sitting in there crying, saying, how do we get this out to everyone in the world? Because when we kind of bring it back to you and I for a moment, that's what I hear a lot of what you're saying is the stories that you're helping get out there and the guests that come here continually in their own way share, we're all connected. We're collective. How can we not learn from each other's experience? And we're literally standing side by side, but yet we don't live that way. And not all of us will take our last breaths thinking that way either.
Absolutely. I've shared this story with a few people. And I remember being really, really quite young, maybe 8 or 9 years old. And it's such a clear image in my mind. It's incredible. My junior school, which I guess is from 7 or 8 until 11, was on my road, the road that I grew up on. So it's June. I've come down the stairs and the sun is beaming through the metal fencing of, see, really, really clear, metal fencing, and I can feel the sun on me. And I remember thinking, and I'm not sure what brought it on, but I do remember that the teacher was reading a book that afternoon, and I think that triggered some thoughts in this little 8-year-old's mind. So I was walking down and I remember thinking that, wow, dependent on who you are, your life can be really, really hard and really, really just not normal. And it's going to be really difficult. And as that 8-year-old, I thought, I know what I'm aware of. I'm growing in this area. We're quite working class, 8 years old. I know that I have to wait for things because there's not always that much money. My parents work really hard. We're 4 girls. We're of a Muslim background, but all of these things. So what I'm going to try to do is do as much as I can to compensate for all of these things that don't make us normal, because we're a person of color, because of lack of wealth, and all of these things. And actually, the connection I make now is I couldn't care less about all of those things. What I would rather have is this enriched feeling of none of us are normal. We're all completely flawed, completely experienced in all sorts of life experiences. And like you perfectly said, completely connected. There's subheadings of emotions, good and bad, and each and every one of us feel it. And that 8-year-old, I feel like saying now, listen, what you're experiencing now as an adult is exactly the thing that you should be experiencing, is life in its greatest, widest form. Wow. It's bizarre that I can still remember that feeling of it being so prominent in my life, that life is not easy. It's really difficult. You're not always going to be seen in the way that you want to be. So you're going to have to make up for that. No, you don't need to make up for it. You just need to make sure that anyone else who looks like you or probably is feeling the same thing, you have a moment of an exchange and in your own way, find ways to elevate them. I think that's why the storytelling aspect, when my dad used to sit there with all of his friends, was he had these stories to tell of all these things that he had done. And sat in his car with 4 friends and drove from Pakistan to London, to a land that he had no idea what he was going to do. I don't remember the materialistic things we had, but I remember those things. Yeah. Hugely empowering in terms of the voices in your head about what you can then go on and do. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's a wonderful way to talk about connection. It's so funny. I always ask my guests, what would you go back and tell your younger self? And you already did it. Going back and talking to the innocence and refining the innocence as we're adults as well. Like, it's so therapeutic to go have these side-by-side conversations with our younger selves, because our worldview is skewed. And as a kid, you don't really know that. You just know what's before you, as you're saying. But as we get older, we look back and we can understand why it was skewed. We can understand where it's coming from. And hopefully, as you're saying, we have the capacity to build off of that and say, well, that's one angle, because that's the angle I was brought up in. But there are all these other ways to add to that spider web of a story. So I think that's well said. I think we should pause and do our middle fingers up segment, and then we can get back into the story that led to seeing the stories. So are you ready? Do you want to put your middle fingers up to something?
Yeah, I thought about this because obviously I knew this question was coming. And I thought there's a lot of comical things that we can say. But I think the most powerful thing for me is putting your middle finger at all the voices that are incredibly, incredibly damaging. And some of which, I remember seeing something on Instagram, and some of the rubbish that we see is awful, but some of it is actually really quite profound. This guy's doing a sketch on a piece of paper. So he's put, 0 when you're born through to your childhood, let's say 13, 14. And he's written childhood underneath. And then from that point to death, he's written getting over your childhood. So it's everything that happens then kind of feeds into whoever you are going forward. And those voices are made up of whether it's parents, whether it's the aunties and the uncles, or the neighbor who's kind of twitching at the curtain, or whatever it might be. I think they are probably the ones that I would stick up the biggest middle finger to. I remember going to a number of weddings as a kid, not wanting to wear the Asian outfits, And my dad would be like, leave her, let her wear the trousers and the t-shirt. And my mum would be absolutely traumatized. But I was like, it's cool, you know, she is who she is. So you get nuggets of support along the way.
Yeah.
But those voices, we all have to stick our middle finger up to.
Totally.
Absolutely.
The way I hear you saying it is, it's like the bridge building between the East and the West in some ways, that wrestling, that piece. You know, my sister could relate to that. There was always, up until even now, it's like the struggle to get into the outfits and those things. That was her childhood too, of like, if we break down, why is this so important? You know, we're all going to a happy wedding and now we're all fighting because we won't put on the Indian outfit. Our parents, like, we don't know, why are we so adamant this has to happen? Because we're just we've been told that's the way. We've never been told why or what, or we can sort of, you know, be flexible and look outside of the box, right? And so it's funny, all these little boxes you get put in, and you probably could be described, I would bet, from a young age as a fighter. Someone that's like trying to get out of those boxes, right? And say, I don't need to like be there and wear this. I could do something, wear something else and still be there. That calling was probably in you from such a young age of like, why do we have to do it this way all the time?
Much to my parents' grief, I'm sure. But I think I always felt this thing of, if I kind of just push it a little bit more and push it a little bit more, I'll get to a point where actually the next thing I ask for won't be as daunting as the one previously. I mean, luckily I have two elder sisters who are probably, you know, I have three sisters, but my two eldest sisters have been incredible champions, and incredible two individuals in my life have always seen me. So I think they kind of help pave the way. The eldest daughter always gets it the hardest, and then it gets a little bit easier, and then a little bit easier. So that certainly helped. So credit to them, absolutely.
I'm the eldest, so I'll take that from you. Thank you very much. I will call my sister and brother after and let them know that Meg said, just so you know. I have such a belief, like I really believe that where we fall in our sibling line, and that includes if you're an only child as well, is such an impact, just like your middle fingers up of, you know, we're spending most of our life trying to make sense of our childhood because it keeps showing up in all parts of our adult relationships. And where we fall in that sibling line, sometimes we don't credit that or pay enough attention to that.
Yeah. It's I've said it to my sisters, it's an absolute blessing. I won't say a curse, but a challenge to love your siblings as much as you do, because you feel their every pain and you also feel their every annoyance as well. So it's incredible. I mean, I'm bang in the middle. I have two elder and two younger. But I wouldn't have it any other way. They're really, they shape who you are. And actually they're a mirror, because they've seen you become every version of yourself. So there's a little reminder of, in good and bad, how far you've come, and also sometimes how far you need to go. It's really good.
I love the journey of siblings and their relationships. And the middle ones, which is sort of where you're at, I'm so grateful, because to me, you guys are the bridge. You help balance out the oldest that's fighting the war with the parents and the baby that's, you know, like, come on, do a little more here, baby. You guys are so helpful in like, hey, we have to do this about, you know, a certain way, or we have to figure this out as siblings. So I'm always grateful to my sister, who's a middle child, and we always make fun of her because we're like, you guys are weird, but also your weirdness is what has made us stay together, because I'm on one extreme and the baby's on the other extreme, right? So
I'll send this part of the conversation to my siblings to remind them of how important my role has been.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, don't forget to mention, you know, a thank you too, because we did fight a lot of wars with the parents. You know, like whether it was clothing, dating was even allowed, you know, which it wasn't in our house. All sorts of things, right? When you're growing up as siblings and you have these secret languages, and there's so much to connect to with our siblings. So I have an MFU today. I don't know if you're familiar with Diljit Dosanjh.
Sounds very familiar.
He's a Punjabi singer. He's known as an international pop star now. So he's right there with, you know, Taylor Swift and Beyonce. He's done a lot of collabs, Ed Sheeran. There's lots of people in mainstream music that he's connected with. But for the Punjabi community, he's done a lot in terms of his music, acting. He sort of brings in a Western vibe, you know, to our Eastern music. So a lot of us like bumping his tunes in our car. So something huge happened with him the other day. He decided he's on his next tour is coming out. So he decided he was going to start his tour in Vancouver.
Okay.
And mostly because his last album was recorded out in Surrey, which is where I'm from. There's a huge Indian community out in the Lower Mainland outside of Vancouver, especially the Punjabi community. And so he sold out we call it the BC Place Stadium. So like our football stadium that has over 54,000 seats. And often pop stars don't sell out there. It's the big ones that do. So he sort of made history for the Punjabi community. This was actually last night, where he is the first international pop star for us to sell out in this way. This is exciting. This is a story that I think we need to get out there. And then, you go on Twitter this morning, not by choice, but that's where my phone always takes me every morning. You read the feedback and lots of yays, like exciting this happened. And there's this one journalist who, she says, these stories are meant to be shared so that people out, particularly white people, can learn about other communities and their stories. We're not asking you to go to the concert. We're not asking you to love our music. But we're asking you to let us have our space. And, we're sharing the space and where we live. And there are other people outside of the Taylor Swifts that, or country stars that can sell out a stadium. And this guy did. And so the media group that she works for would not allow her to put this story out because there wasn't a familiarity or a connection. And you just see the oppression, right? In so many ways with mainstream media. And, my middle fingers is going up to that part, to the oppression. And, kudos to her to get on and share that. Kudos to her to still find a way to get the story out and so eloquently say, again, when you put these barriers up, you're getting in the way of stories that should be shared. The community should know that we're thriving. This is a huge thing. We should all be bumping fists about it. But the opposite happens quite a bit out here. And so that big middle fingers up is there are so many stories, as you and I are already talking about, out there. And when we are so specific to the kind that we want that, serve one population, I think we have to keep fighting and we have to keep talking about this is a problem. Like we can't allow our communities to not thrive, especially since we're finally getting to a place where we're just not surviving anymore. We are actually thriving. We have like a big music scene, for example, that is being recognized outside of the community itself. That's huge. And I think there should be space that allows us to be able to, get this out there. So that's where my middle fingers is going up to. It's disheartening that we continually have to stick on the negativity. This guy just sold out. He's a full Punjabi turban guy. Like, this is huge. And, I said to my husband this morning, I'm like, get on Ticketmaster. See, he's coming to Calgary. Get us 4 tickets. Because you know what? It's also a history lesson for our boys to go and experience this, right? So anyways, just want to say, like, move over, everybody in mainstream, because we're not going to. So just so you know.
Exactly, and well said, and a great one to bring up, because actually there has always been room for everyone. I think that's the important thing, is that there was always room and there still is, but the capacity now, or like you said, whether we've found way and there's people that have championed those before us to allow us to do it, but for that guy to do that should be celebrated.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I have heard it, but now I'm gonna Google him. Now, even if he's coming to London, I might contemplate going to see him. There you go.
Totally.
Exactly. And also we're enriched by the cultural richness that we've always lived in. Why wouldn't you want that to be amplified? That, look at this guy, he's doing his thing, and it's incredible. I mean, if you grew up in the area, clearly there's been an Indian presence for so many years. So it's extraordinary that people, and I'm hopefully not making a sweeping statement, but there is still a need to feel threatened by everyone getting the platform. There is no threat.
That's just it. There is no threat.
There is absolutely room for
Well said. Yeah. So anyways, good job, Diljit. Hopefully, your tickets won't sell out. We'll get to go. But even if we don't, let's it's a good time for our community, and I think we should, like you said, be celebrating. And 54,000. people in that stadium. Like that just, again, to me is hope, and so much hope about, okay, inspiration, like we can do this as for all the communities. Again, it's not just, it happens to be, part of Punjabi history now for us, but like we said, we're sharing that space, sharing that stadium, sharing our voices. And like you said, there has always been room for this. And I like how you re-script that, because sometimes it feels like we're just learning that now, but you're right, there always has. I think we have people that are, paving the way out there, so that, he's one of those people. You're one of those people that are like, okay, let's get these stories out there. So let's talk about you for a second here. I want to start with the photography plate. Like we share stories in all sorts of different ways. How did photography come about? Was that something that you always loved as a child, or later in years?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've always been into art or drawing or taking pictures from being a kid. Having those two elder siblings, really quite academic, super, super, super clever. And here this was this kid who just liked drawing or playing with things. I studied art through college, university, a fine art degree. No idea what I was going to do, specialise in photography. So that the camera has always been a tool. And for many years, it was a tool for generating an income. So I've pretty much done anything from shoots at a birthday party through Asian weddings, as I'm sure you know, where there's like 600 to 800 people at a wedding. I've been that photographer who's running around like a headless turkey trying to get a picture of everyone. All sorts. So over the last, since graduating, I've developed a real, I guess, confidence for being able to take a photograph. So alongside that, I've always worked with I've been very fortunate to always work with lots and lots of different people. So photography was a natural way of documenting people. So when I came up with the idea, it came from the thing of, right, so I want to sit with someone, have a conversation, which I know I can do. I am my father's daughter. And that has actually been the skill that has actually championed a career that I've had. So if I wasn't taking photographs, I've kind of worked with really large corporates in central London who've wanted to work or wanted to work with young people. So I was the go-between. So I was the one having the conversations with schools and the colleges saying, you've got some brilliant young people and we've got these businesses who want to work with you. And let's kind of bring you all together. So I was the person who was having the conversations, like I said. So I thought, well, how can I bring these two worlds together? And thought, right, I'm going to ask a few friends and family and say, we're going to sit down, we're going to have a chat. But at this point, they were very used to me coming up with crazy ideas. We will have a chat. And again, photography will be the tool in which I document you as the individual. I was very confident being able to take that picture. But what's fascinating, and I learned it within the first 10, because they were predominantly, like, my niece is one of the first 10, some young people that I've known since they were 11 years old and were in their 20s. And I needed for that person to come through in that photograph. So it wasn't just at a wedding taking a picture and moving on to the next person. I needed to see the person I had just seen in conversation through the lens. So when the person, like your good self, then sees them, is being part of that whole experience. So photography was always going to be the tool. It's within the first, the 100 is predominantly made of friends and family. And then naturally you put yourself on Instagram and for every person that then liked or began following, I would get in touch and say, thank you for following. Thank you for, giving a nod to or being interested in the work. Would you like to take part? And that's how it's kind of just carried on.
Yeah. So how did you decide, though, to bring life to seeing the stories? Like, was there a particular thing that inspired the journey of, I'd love to hear about it.
Absolutely. So again, going back to that moment of sitting on the balcony, I had changed paths a few times. So working for businesses, working for schools and colleges, and had been doing it for myself. And I thought, and I think my father had passed away a year and a half before COVID. And for anyone who's lost a parent, it's a massive shock to your entire existence, regardless of how great that relationship or challenging it has been. As we know, it's never easy. I'm flawed, as he was too, and I'm sure my mom and my siblings would vouch for that too. But he gave us all a gift, and that gift very much was of seeing his kids and saying, even though that I don't understand, you want to do this thing, okay, go and do it, and I hope it works out. So I thought, what could I do to endlessly have a thing that's dedicated to him and not to my father? So that's where this idea of, he saw me. And in my work with young people, I also knew that the thing that worked more than anything else was when those young people felt seen, whether that was by me or by a mentor that I had brought in for a project. Something happened to them. I saw these young people change, and each time they were seen and moved by that experience, they grew in confidence. Yeah. They grew in their own understanding and self-belief. So I guess it was 20 years of all of these experiences, and then thinking, I've got to do something for my dad. I can't forget him, which I was never going to. But on a daily basis, I want it to be that I'm doing this because you've given me that gift, Dad, and I want to pass that on. And Scene was just the epitome of the entire thing. And you know, he is the storyteller that, like I said, where it all came from. And stories have always been my thing. I will talk until the cows come home, as they say in London. And it was a natural thing. My sisters actually are starting a little business, and they're finding it hard to think of a name. And they said, how did you come up with the name? I mean, I said, to me, it was, I needed it to say the thing that I was doing, like say what it's going to do. And the two just naturally came together.
Your siblings, you talked a little bit about them. What would they say if they were here today about this passion project and your just inspiration and the impact you have by being seen, by seeing others? What would they say? Like, would they say, yeah, this is where we are? Would they say, no, Meg's a little different in that sense? Like, I'm curious about their feedback.
It's a good question. Their feedback would be that probably I don't accredit myself to as much as I've done. And I think we are of that, possibly that generation where we're not very good at that. I am still that 8-year-old kid in some ways who feels like I should be doing much, much more to compensate for so much. And I don't know whether that is a generational thing or whether that is being first generation born in foreign land. But I am relentlessly feeling like I could be doing more. I could have done 500 or 600 or 700 stories by now. And I think their thing would be that she's always done it. Now she's just doing it with a camera and other people can see it, which is hard for me to even say because of the work that I've done. You know, like I said, I've worked with young people, I've worked with teenagers, young adults, and it's always been at the core of it, seeing an individual, seeing what it is that they need to advance where it is that they're going off based on their experiences and stories. They probably have a lot to say. My siblings are very chatty.
Get them on the call. You're talking about seeing others, and we've been sort of talking about that. Do you feel like you see yourself? Have you seen your story?
I'm seeing it more.
Yeah.
And that's a very powerful question. I am seeing it more. And I think actually at the core of this, I do believe this whole project could be seen by me as somewhat selfish, because what I get to do is I get to see all these people and I then naturally get to see myself more. Because when you're sitting and you're hearing someone share their story, it's a mirror to yours. Because like you said, fundamentally, we're all connected in the fact that we all have a childhood, we all have challenges, we all have ups and downs. And I think that's why in the same breath, I know this is what I will have to do forever now. So thank you for asking that question, because I've actually had to acknowledge that I am seeing my own story a little bit more clearly. Because there is that point of reflection every time I sit with someone. Yeah.
Do you feel when you have that point of reflection, there's like a theme that sort of comes back for you after sitting with all your clients? And when you reflect, like, is there one thing that sort of stands out the most?
I think the thing that stands out the most is that there is something in this exchange.
Yeah.
There is something in two individuals sitting and deciding to give each other this gift, because it is a gift. And I was with someone just yesterday, and it was like 2.5 hours later. And literally, I've never met this woman before in my entire life. She agreed to be part of it. We met outside her workplace, and we just started talking like we knew each other. And we sat down, and she said to me, she said, I can't believe we're already chatting like this. And I said to her, it has nothing to do with me. Please do not credit me with this. But it's because we've had the agreement before we even met. So I've said, I'm interested in seeing who you are. And you've returned that question by agreeing to be seen. Mm. And whatever comes within that space that we share, anywhere I am with these individuals, is this feeling of something happens. Two people are moved in experience when they see one another. And I can't put a value to that, because it's different to each individual. Yeah. But it's extraordinary.
It is. And that brings me to the word isolation, because we've been talking about connection, and to me, the opposite of that is isolation. And we are a mental health podcast, and mental health impacts us on a daily, no different than our physical health. Mental health is the same. I hear about a lot of people on their journey doing it in isolation. I myself have picked moments in my journey where I'm doing something in my own head and could have really used my community and chose not to. Felt like I couldn't, all these things. So what would you say to those folks listening today that are learning so much about the intimacy of this connection, and maybe are thinking, I love that for you, but that's not for me, or maybe even getting tricked by the word I'm private, or whatever it is that causes us to go into that isolation pot? What would you say about that? Because you're probably experiencing something completely different in your journey.
I would say it comes back to the middle finger question that you asked me. Is that there's a voice in your head saying that you can't do that. You can't allow yourself to share a little bit of who you are or your story to another. I've had people say to me, this has felt like therapy, because we've sat together and we've had this conversation. And don't get me wrong, it's not just this individual sat opposite me sharing themselves. I am one of those people that says I'm quite a private person. But you will find yourself sharing parts of your story or experience that you've never said out loud, because the emotions attached to someone sharing this intimate or private, and not necessarily always this huge thing, but something. I think it's a connection you feel with heart and mind that you would naturally then say, do you know what? I can also tell you something, because I want to show value to what you've just done for me. I would like to do for you. So it's the voice that's telling you can't. And I would say absolutely try it in a small way. There is nothing like having a safe space to do so. And I would like to believe that everyone has, if just one, there will be a safe space. And try it with that first safe space, and allow the ripple to grow. There is nothing more powerful than conversation, as this proves time and time again. Yeah. It really is life affirming. You say things out loud. I've had people say things to me that I was absolutely sure of, that I had understood about myself, and it's literally like someone just picked up something and gone, yeah, but there's this whole other side over here that you've not even considered, and walked away thinking 43 years and I've not contemplated that angle, and I'm not the same person. Yeah. Maybe I can be bold enough to say every time I've met someone, I'm not the same person anymore, even if it's a delicate change. I would like to say it makes me better, I hope. Yeah. And I can then pass that on, because the conversations I then have with others that they say about a situation that I've learned, that's knowledge that I can then share. It's not something I've just read. It's from a lived experience. That's a huge part of why I'm doing this. And this kind of caveats perfectly into right now, the work is very much the photography, because I feel that's my tool, and the words that I write, which is dedicated wholeheartedly to the person who shared their story with me. But I'm actually going to start, and I pray it goes well, to record some of the conversation. because I think it's now becoming a space where some of their words should be shared with the world. And I hope I will do it justice. But that's hopefully coming very soon, where it's their words that are also being given a platform, which I think will be incredibly moving.
Yeah, like we talk about at some point in our lives losing our voice, reinventing our voice, finding our voice. We all have a journey with our voice. And that is so powerful to record and people to have that as a gift for themselves, but also maybe for loved ones, if it's their children, family members, something being left behind. But I also agree that there is something therapeutic, whether you write it out or talk it out or record it or however it gets out. Once it's out of our mind and body and out there, there's such a different way to comprehend the meaning of what it is that we're experiencing or saying. When it's in my head still, it's like my first draft. And there's lots of red, pens and don't say that. Don't ever say that. Tuck that one away, rip that up. But there's something freeing when you get it out there. And to have, you're like a guide that's sort of helping people maybe at times like find their way out of the darkness into the light. And we all need that guide, because I would agree with what your clients would say. Like, I don't have a story to share. I hear that so much with guests that I invite. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you should be hosting this podcast. What do you mean you don't have a story to tell? And my sister, I'm going to put her on the spot. She is one of those people that will, I want to do the siblings episode, and I want to do this episode with her. She's so reluctant, and yet this woman has so much to share and tell. Now make her feel bad. I'm like, you're just being selfish. You just want to keep your story true. Like, now I'm going like the reverse psychology way, because I'm so desperate, running out of like tools. I'm like, you're just being selfish now. But sometimes it is like this thing called, gift sharing. When we hold on to some of these, whether it's material things or the things in our mind or about ourselves so tightly, we just lose out on the opportunity of what it could not only do for us, but others that are accepting that information that's coming out. And everyday people that are experiencing relevant things that other everyday people, how can we not say, I relate to that story, or that is so much like my childhood. My parents also came to this way. You look like me. I just want to know more about you. I've never heard of another woman speak that way. Like, it just opens so many doors. I think it's the best education possible in the way that you're doing it, which is sitting down with people and giving them the time to be able to ask them to give themselves the time. Because who does that? Who gives themselves the time?
And that's a really wonderful way of putting it, is you're actually giving yourself the time, because by saying it out loud, maybe you're hearing your own story for the first time.
Yeah.
Because you haven't said it out loud. And I think maybe it's a cultural restriction as well. You don't openly talk about your life. You're not supposed to. Everything's quite locked down, whether it's been whatever range of experiences. But to share that and say it out loud, I think you are helping so many others like you. There is that thing of, if I see someone who looks like me, who's done something similar, or something, has experienced something, or is aspiring to become something, maybe I can do it too. So there is that aspirational thing. And sometimes that's not restricted in age. I've had some of the people take part, look at some of the stories of the younger, and thought, how is this 15-year-old doing this? And it's like, yes, there isn't a restriction in age. You can feel empowered and encouraged by anybody's story.
Oh my gosh.
I'm 200, and I think on Instagram about 210 pictures in, and I've taken a pause, because I'm actually going to adjust slightly how I'm sharing the story, because I think it needs to be more. So there's a couple of stories left that are going to be done in the way that they've always been done. And I don't want to say a relaunch, that makes it sound too brandy, but it's just wanting to work on having that point of reflection. Is this the way that I now want to take it forward? Because there's been, wonderful interest from a number of people, and the project is growing. So I think it's natural to say, right, there's this way, there's the image, there's the text. Like I've said, maybe there's a short film element to it, and just to provide more, because I get the nugget of all that goodness.
Yeah.
And I think I should be sharing a little bit more of that. watch this space, hopefully.
That's amazing. I love that's part of the journey. It's like we things change, we grow. Yeah, we can call it rebranding, but that's been happening. To me, rebranding is like just getting more clear about our identity in some ways. You know, like who am I? Oh, I have a little more, another layer to add. You know, you mentioned earlier your age range from like as young as 10 to as old as 87, I believe you said.
84, yeah.
84. So do you see any kind of differences in how this story is shared between the ages?
No, I think what I found is the teenager who's shared their experiences or their story is like a slimmed down version of what the 60-year-old has said. So that's another way that it's all connected. And it's just advanced on when you've sat with a 24-year-old thinking, I've graduated, what am I doing now? That search for something. But those key things that we feel in every decade of our lives, I think that remains. It's just greater depth or more experience and lived experiences attached to that. There is common denominators amongst all of them. And funnily enough, being seen and heard is an integral one amongst all of them. And people might not necessarily articulate it in those very words, but that's exactly what we're all asking for. Mm-hmm. We're asking to be seen, we're asking to be heard, we're asking to be accepted. And that is the same for the 84-year-old, I won't say who it is because I don't ever put their ages, but she's an extraordinary woman. I've known her for a long time. And yet she was just as self-aware, just as nervous, just as all of the things that the 23-year-old who was sat in the park on a sunny day who looked beautiful in youth felt. So isn't that just warming that we feel the same thing? Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah. And also it cross genders as well.
Yeah, okay.
That doesn't change. Maybe the language being used is slightly different, but fundamentally we're still craving the same things from our lived experience of life.
Right. You had mentioned there was common denominators between all. Are there a few you could share with us?
Yeah, I would say I think one of the biggest ones is a search for who we are.
Like our identity?
Who we are in the world. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as we know, our identity or what we define as our identity in our 40s is very different to what we did in our 30s.
Right.
So whether it's a thing of who we are and where we're going, or in terms of, well, I'm wanting to be something else and I'm still holding myself back.
Yeah.
It's the kind of range of thoughts and decisions attached to that. We're forever evolving. So that's a huge common denominator. I think also, their role in what societal expectations are is a huge one. I think, as we know, social media has a lot to contend with that. Mm-hmm. But we grew up without social media, and it was still just as strong because we had the aunties next door or down the road that were all looking and twitching those curtains to see what we're all doing. But those expectations of who we are now or how much we've achieved and what we should be doing is a big one.
What advice, like if we had some of your clients here today, what advice would they give or what would they say about what it means to be seen?
I would like to think from the experience of having this sit down. And again, I don't credit myself because it's happened in the way because of me. I credit the gift of being seen. And I'm just there facilitating that, let's say, somewhat. I think that the advice that they would give is what they have felt from it. People should find that within their own lives and share it amongst others. And like we've already kind of said a number of times, it's actually very freeing to have that experience for yourself and to give to others and find as many ways in which that can occur through our lives because we grow through that experience. I get to see this person feeling like that something has occurred during our conversation. And I'm hoping that they feel the same when they're looking at my face. Because I'm like, I never thought of it like that. We would all feel so much more connected.
Yeah.
Very much so.
So can you talk a little bit about the process behind seeing the story? I'm sure people are like, can you get to this part? Like, how is this even happening? So What would
Okay.
you take us through? Like, what could people expect should they show up? And maybe there's some secrets that you want to keep for when people show up. But yeah, I'm curious. Like, if I were to show up tomorrow, what would this be like for me?
There's no secret at all, and there's no secret formula, so anyone could be doing it. And I'd like to think that's why it makes it. Hopefully, others will begin to do it. But it's as simple as we find a date and a time and find a place. It's usually something that's kind of a neutral space. And that can be a coffee shop, a walk in the park. Sometimes dependent on what the person is doing for a living, it may be their workspace. And we literally sit down over a cup of something and we talk. That is it. And a number of people have texted and said, is there anything I need to prepare for? Can you send me some questions? What do I need to say? And I always just say, just turn up as you are and nothing else. So we sit down. There is never anything. I'm not even writing any notes down. And each time I think, should I write this down or should I be recording it? It's like, I want to be present in the moment. I want to be looking at the person's face and having the conversation. So what anyone would expect is someone who is coming along, interested in the conversation, having a conversation. And that is literally it. And what's wonderful, a lot of the people who are then having their picture taken have not only said, I don't have a story, they say, oh, I don't photograph very well.
Yes.
I don't like having my picture taken. But after you've sat down and had an hour or two conversation, that there's an element of familiarity and you've got to know each other. So that tenseness that you felt about a stranger taking your picture to some extent has diminished. And that the picture actually happens, 80% of the time very quickly. So it's not this huge photo shoot. We were just either in the moment or while I'm talking to the person, I've kind of psyched the area where we are. And I'll say, let's go outside because it's sunny, because I think that would be really lovely. Or just as you're sat here right now, I'm just going to take the picture and it's like, go for it. I never tell anyone or direct anyone. It's just capturing that moment the best I can.
The two words that come up for me are genuine and authentic. Like that's how I would imagine the process to feel. You're trying to preserve that for your client. I can totally feel that. And B, if I was there, I would imagine on behalf of your clients, they would probably say, yeah, like it's literally genuine, authentic. Like you said, it's not a huge photo shoot. It's those can be fun too, but you're really trying to preserve this person as they are and who they are. And not all that added noise that we tend to bring along with us.
Absolutely.
To me, would be so amazing. But also there's that vulnerable piece again, because people are showing up not knowing, just like, you today and get guests before showing up with, okay, we don't really know what we're doing or saying or whatnot. But to me, that's where I'm always like, I don't want to, let's just start recording because I don't want to get the good stuff out now, because I think being genuine, authentic, that is why people keep coming back every week to listen to guests like yourself. Absolutely. Because they feel like they're sitting in the room and it's not rehearsed. It's so relatable. So when I look at these pictures too, you do them in such a cool way that strips all the glam and everything, and you really get to focus in on your client, on the person that you are taking the photo of, and it's done so well. It's really cool. I'm curious if anyone's had like a crappy experience from it where you're like, oh, this is different.
No, touch wood.
That's amazing. And that many hundreds. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because of what you've just said. It's very authentic. So when someone does say, can I prepare, is how can you make preparation for who you actually are already?
Yes.
You can't prepare for you. You just have to turn up as you. So no one's come back and said, oh, I'm not sure about that picture. No one has said, what have you written? Because there is, I hope that I always ensure that there is that authenticity, and genuinely I am interested in the person sat opposite me. I started this out of a sheer need and desire and want to do something. It didn't come from, let's see how much money I can make. It's not come from that. And for the last year, I have put everything into this. I'm not doing anything else. This passion project has become who I am. Yeah. It's not even my job. It's who I am. This is what I do. So when I turn up to meet the next person, I'm turning up as someone who is doing this thing because I live by it. Yeah. I hope is why no one walks away thinking, oh, I'm not sure about that. I'd like to think no one has done so far.
Yeah, well, I believe
that continues.
Yeah, I would have been surprised had you said yes to that question because of how you talk about it. And, you know, when you describe it, trying to put myself in that place, or you think, okay, yeah, it would be no different than a conversation on the phone with a friend or someone. You know, we don't often call back and say, can I redo that conversation we had? Right. Unless if it was a fight with your sibling, maybe that's different.
Don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm a designer as well. I've done design work years and years ago, and photography for events and things, and people have gone back and said, oh, could you just change? There's an end product in need for that. There is no end product here. It's just the experience, and then documenting that experience. It's becoming an archive of stories, and accidentally so. So I think that's why, because there isn't that prescribed nature of it, no one has come back and said, I really don't like this. All good so far.
So when you first start, if you look back to when you started this a few years ago to where you are with over 200 stories, is this sort of how you envision this to go? Or are you at a place where you're like, this has gone a completely different way?
It started off as something that I wanted to do alongside of earning a living. And at the time, I was working as a consultant, working with businesses and schools, earning a very good income, doing absolutely fine. And actually, within a few months of doing that, I decided to end a lot of those contracts to invest more time. And I wasn't sure what it would turn into. I just wanted to see where there really was something that had longevity in terms of, would I get to a point and people start to say, no, actually, I try not to look at the numbers on Instagram, because actually a lot of what's come off this project or from this project has had nothing to do with Instagram. Will I get to a point where actually it's just redundant? And that's not happened. Yeah. So what it's turned into is more and more stories. I was about 150 or so stories in. And I think I mentioned this to you during our communication, but I felt that there was something in this that could translate into going into spaces where that space of people, their story could be told. So could you go into a community and document each individual person's story that's connected to this community, and then tell an overarching story of these groups of people? So what naturally started happening was I would start to have conversations with people and say, this is what I do, would you be interested? And I could be quite candid and say, selfishly, I just want to travel the world with this project, and say, let me come to this little town in Sicily and see if I can tell the story of these people. But I've got to do some work before I get there. But what's happened is I have started to do that. I'm going into spaces and telling the story of these spaces and documenting exactly that, which has been extraordinary. One such thing is my former secondary school, so that's 11 to 16, is an incredible girls' school in East London. Me and my sisters, we all went there. There's been a legacy of female head teachers. The current head teacher is extraordinary. I can't say that enough. So I approached her, and I'm also a governor at this school, which basically means I volunteer and I'm part of a team of volunteers, and we meet 7 or 8 times a year just to make sure that the school is doing great things, and we ask the right questions about finances and plans and ideas, and we try to help. So I went to this extraordinary head teacher and I said, look, I'm doing this project. Could I try to sell the story of this place where young girls are seen and heard, predominantly of South Asian background, and amplify those stories? And she's like, if you can get some funding, let's do
just
it.
Do it.
Just do it. So I did exactly that. I managed to find a little bit of funding because seeing the stories are done in centuries. I said, right, we're going to do the first century. So for about 6 months, I met with 100 women who are current students, former students that are now in their 30s, 40s and 50s, and a wider community attached to that school. And in September last year, we did an exhibition in their iconic South Hall. And I remember standing there, obviously as a former student and having these 100 stories that I managed to, with a lot of help, hang these portraits from the ceiling that filled this space. And I was like emotional beyond belief, because these women's stories were given the space to be seen in a way that they deserve. Off the back of that, I'm now working on a second century, managed to get a little bit of more funding, and it's casting the net wider. So at the very core of it is this school where these 11 to 16-year-olds are, like I said, encouraged and being seen and heard. But by getting stories of women from outside of the community across London, there's a point of aspiration as well, because these young women are seeing these older women do all the things that they've probably not even thought of, working in construction, being a designer, being a singer. And this now is becoming a project that kind of runs alongside seeing the stories, because it's woken up a desire as being one of four sisters that women's stories really need more space and should be heard and shared. So there's going to be another exhibition in June. We've got some more sponsorship. And then the idea going from the summer onwards is turning it hopefully into a bit of a campaign, where by doing another century, like 300 stories of these rocking women of varying ages will be taken into lots of different spaces. And that's very dear to my heart, because like I said, one of four sisters, it's a nod to my parents, it's a nod to every woman that I meet who is doing so much, sometimes so much more than was expected of them, all within 24 hours. And that's a huge one. And I hope to share more of that, both on Instagram, on the website. There's a lot of, I hope, good work that's going to be coming in the next few months.
I mean, I am speechless because, you know, we talked about in the MFU earlier, and just people paving the way, people from our communities. And, you know, that is who you are, paving the way for so many generations. And when you talk about the younger generation and the others, like, I can't help think about all that intergenerational trauma that many of us are, you know, like I said, going from surviving, now that we're thriving, we get to go back and make amends with our ancestors and this, you know, blood angry sort of that comes out for many of us in our histories. And in my mind, you know all of this, and you know, the best way possible that you can do it is by using your skill set and putting these stories out. And I think it's so healing. And that's the word that comes up for me, is healing for many women, let alone, you know, the women that will participate in this project that have this school in common. It's so symbolic. As you know, the history, how many women could go to school, how many women still can't, and all these sorts of things. And so to me, my inner creativity, my inner light is like shining so hard when I hear that, because I think, yes, that is what we need out there. And you're doing it in such a gentle way so that hopefully others can find healing in that. So thank you for that. That's an amazing. I hope to be part of those stories, and like in terms of like your stories that you share on Instagram, like I hope you post all these things and put them out there so that it's a gift sharing. We can all see that. And it doesn't matter where we live in the world, right? Again, the astronauts would say, the astronaut gods, I don't know, but they would, right? Like we're all connected. It doesn't matter where we are. Those stories are going to travel to here. And now I get to go and tell my mom and other women around me, like, hey, did you know that this is happening? I think that is how you are seen.
With the power of like we're doing right now, I'm hoping that I can slightly step away with my desire to create the photograph in person, because you should absolutely be part of that project. So I would want you to be one of the women featured in the centuries, because actually there is no restriction. There is no restriction in terms of, we could have this you could have a cup of coffee right there, as I could, and we could have that conversation, and I could take a picture of you through this screen, because actually the point that I'm coming back to again and again is, now I feel like this passion project, or this desire to feel like I will never forget my dad, and I will forever like thank him.
Aww.
Yeah. I will forever thank him.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's thank him. somebody, actually my therapist, I'm just going to be honest, my therapist, she's of color. So I'm doing some work with her about some of my cultural and some of my struggles I'm having. And she said to me, and this is what I hear you doing. And she's like, it sounds like you're trying to figure out what kind of ancestor you want to be. And I found that so powerful because of our stories, our untold stories, how history has somehow changed, yet our stories is still our story. And you're one of those warriors, one of those fighters, one of those people that are out there doing exactly what resonated with me through her, which is, okay, like we have one life, one opportunity, and a lot of shittiness has happened to many of us. And so how do we want, to be known? What kind of ancestors do we want? You're breaking barriers, you're breaking intergenerational trauma, all by being creative. And sometimes we think with imposter syndrome, we have to, like you said, go big and do this mass, write a book about how to save trauma and all this. And there's lovely people doing that. Yet you're going about it in such a way that I think connects so many of us in a gentle way, because it's such an intimate part, right? Of our stories are so intimate, and some of us are ashamed of our stories and don't want to share them. And I think your work is really helping us re-script. Is there something to be ashamed of when this is who I am? And I'm still here. Can I work through that? Or at least learn from this other woman here or this other child, other person, and maybe their story can help me start doing my own work with my own story. And so to me, I also mean that from the bottom of my heart. Like this is important stuff you're doing. And I hope you get to soak that in as well.
I try. I think just something that you said, again, this is the power of conversation. I've not even thought of it in a sense of having that kind of what type of ancestor or generational impact I'd like to have. I mean, I don't have children, but I have 2 nieces, nephews, and I couldn't love them any more than I do. I mean, I feel like they're the closest thing to me as my own children. And actually, if I feel this sense of like, I want them to know that that life is an abundance. There are no limitations, and also there is goodness in being a kind person, in listening and seeing others, and all of those things. And I'm in this very fortunate position where I've had so many people around me. Every time I've taken a little bit of a leap, they're right there when my feet land back on the ground, and then like, let's go. And that has been, in time, in finance, in support, in, yes, you can have the roof terrace of this plush law firm in central London, and you can show your work there, because we also champion stories. We also champion women. We did an event on International Women's Day where some of those former students came into this space where there was 200 people, and they shared their stories in front of this audience. It was like captivating. It was like the magic of being seen was in every corner of that room. And I just literally felt that was the best moment for me, because this is when the best part of the project is when I sit back and I'm seeing everybody else see what these stories are doing. I'm the laborer, I feel like, who's just going around.
Okay, but what does that do for you, though, when you are sitting in that room and seeing it from this macro perspective and these, magic of being seen? Like, how do you describe that for you in that moment? What is that feeling like?
I think the word that always comes to mind is I am hugely grateful, because I get to do this thing. Yeah. And I know so many people who don't know their thing, can't do their thing, won't allow themselves to. And I don't know what it's inside of me that has just relentlessly said, okay, just that kid that went, just push a little bit more. See if mum would allow you to stay out an extra hour. That's just stayed. Yeah. And I say it as a joke, but so many of my friends who are my friends that have now been like sponsors and things have said, I'm just going to keep asking. So feel free to say no at some point. But in that moment, when I can see that happening, I feel very grateful. And I hope someday soon I'll feel very proud. I'm not yet. I hope I will, because that would be a nice feeling to feel that towards yourself, to feel like you've done something great, and it will be here way past the time you're on this earth. to someone to say, you know, I saw this story, or I sat with Meg, and then these stories, whatever it might be, that would be extraordinary. I have this thing of slight tangent, but I have this vision of the satchel kid in my mind. I remember being this kid and always wanted a leather satchel. Don't ask me why. And years later, one of the first times I started earning some money, I bought a satchel, a leather one. And I had this vision that I will be able to one day have that satchel, camera in that bag, and I would have enough of something in an idea to take that camera anywhere and do something with it. And I feel the reason why I can start to feel a little bit prouder is that I'm getting close to that. I couldn't have done it in my 30s because I wasn't ready for it. And we have to always address that. And that's really hard. You wish you had started earlier, but you couldn't. I had to start now, and I'm ready now. And I hope I'll be able to come to Canada and do
oh my gosh, please
this
do.
anyway.
Yeah. Honestly, I was like, if you weren't going to say it, I was going to. But yeah, like bring that satchel with you. You know, it's like your passport. Take it around the world because you will. You can't not, because I can see the spider web, right? And just all these strings that are attached to these stories, and they're all unraveling because one story leads to another and to another. And, you know, again, if we look at our ancestry, who knows, maybe you'll be back in Pakistan. You're starting there, and where the route your dad took to get to where he did, and working backwards. Sometimes I feel like that's how we are when we're born. We're working backwards to you know, this end that we're all so afraid of. But it's like, okay, how do we want to work through that? And the thing I'm loving about you is your humbleness and your lack of needing to be in the spotlight about this. And I do hope as well, though, through your humbleness, you will be proud, because what you've started and where it's going is something to already be so grateful and proud of. You know, here we are and having this story, and you won't get to know all the things that are going through my head, because that's how we are as people. But, you know, one of those things going through my head is like, gosh, I'm so glad that you're here. I'm so glad that your dad did what he did and your mom did what she did to get you guys to where you are, so that you could be doing the work you're doing, because there are so many people out there that don't have that capacity, and you're doing it for them.
Thank you very much. I think you see all sorts of things in our parents, things that you don't want to see, but there's lots of that. But you do get to a point that you think, I can actually acknowledge the good stuff.
Yes.
And they've done things in spite of, and that in spite of is all sorts of limitations that they've had on them. But what a beautiful idea that you've just put out there in terms of going backwards, starting in Pakistan and leading all the way back. I mean, it might not be as easy to drive through some borders, but there is something very powerful in that, because, you know, I think he was in his late 20s, early 30s, to say to his mum, you know, he lost his dad at 7, and he's, you know, 1 or 2 brothers and 5 sisters. So him and his brother had a sense of responsibility to take care of the family, get them all married, as they would do back in the 50s and 60s, got them all married, and he could then start his life at like 29, 30, and, you know, asked his mum's permission, who does that, to say, I'm going to go to London for a few years, not being able to speak the language, not really being educated, not knowing what you're going to do. That is, to me, like, seriously cool and seriously brave.
Totally. Being a pioneer.
Absolutely. I'm not sure I would have had the life I have now if I was born in Pakistan.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's no disrespect to Pakistan or India or any of the other countries, but the 80s, when I was growing up, would not have offered the opportunities that I had in the 80s in this country.
As a girl.
The freedom.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
For sure.
So thank you for coming, and thank you for my mum coming over too, and embracing it, like I said, in spite of allowed things to occur. So hats off to parents.
It is. And this part of this conversation is such a, like, for me, it's so healing in that it's the breaking that intergenerational trauma, right? Like we keep saying that thriving and surviving. And right here, you are in a place, in a safe place where you get to actually sit here and say thank you. And, you know, like, part of telling these stories, I'm sure this is something I wouldn't need to tell you, we start in the middle often, We don't start at the beginning. And I think, you and I've talked a lot about where we're in this reflective stage in our 40s. And being in our 40s, I feel like we get to start at the beginning of a lot of these stories, including our own. And some of that, going back and visiting your childhood, you as a child, I think we start to find a lot of forgiveness from maybe people in our world that just can't do that, or trying to, ask for forgiveness in different ways or what. But like, I know for me, if I want to sit here in my 40s and be mad at my mom and dad for the things that they didn't do or did do, I then also have to balance it with where was their story at the time that I came in? Because their story, it started before that, and they're just snowballing, trying to figure it out, having a baby as a baby. And then you can't help but wonder, okay, what about my grandparents? And all of a sudden here we are, outside of this earth looking down. And when we start to back it up and look at these stories, where they come from. And I feel like that's what you're doing. You're shining a spotlight on an individual, but it's also educating us and inspiring us to like look beyond that too, because this is a snapshot in this person's story that you're capturing. It's not the be all of the story. It's part of the story. And to me, that's what safety is. It's a snapshot in time, so it's lovely to see those things. And that's where healing for me comes. Like, that's where I keep going back to that word of healing and what you're doing by honoring these stories and the importance of them.
So much of this is probably reminds me of the question that you asked about a common denominator, is there's always a reason why. There's a reason why you are where you are, and there's a reason why you do what you do. And I think what you said about, do I see more of my own story now? Absolutely, I do, because of the work that I'm doing now. And maybe it's my form of therapy and my form of healing. It probably is. And maybe being heartbroken, sat on that balcony, thinking of my father, or thinking of where I should be by now in my own life and my own creativity or career, brought all of those things together. Timing, as we said, is everything.
Absolutely.
So in that moment, it was what was needed, and it has given me so much. And so I get to get so much for myself, and hopefully that has a ripple effect for anyone else that's engaging with the work.
Totally.
I hope so.
Yeah. I think that's well said. It's always funny when we think, right? Like, why am I where I'm at? Why am I not where I should be? And it's like, who decided that? It's the same thing as a little girl being forced to wear the Indian outfit. Because somebody said you have to, and somebody said we have to be somewhere. And then we're like, that's all we're distracted by, like chasing after this thing that where we're supposed to be. Meanwhile, the rest of the life is happening before our eyes. Yeah. And I think sometimes we have to find a way to be okay with, I am where I am for a reason. And when for me, when I expect more, I think it's like going back again and starting at the beginning. I am where I am for a reason at this place. Like I'm battling some of my own learning, the hard parts of this journey. And I see some friends and some family that are ahead. And I think, man, why can't I be where you are? You're so much less angry about this. But, I'm not them. And you're not, you're not anyone else but you. Your journey is here for a reason. And who knows if it would have been as impactful if you did the things you did when you did them, because you're at this place now where you see impact in such a different way. And when you speak in particular. So my way of saying, I think be okay with where we're at too. So I'm going to ask you at this point, is there anything that you wish I had asked, or that maybe we talked about, or want to go back and clarify before we move to a call to action?
I think I maybe would like to emphasize a point, maybe.
Yeah.
And I think that really is this desire to take this, and I said it quite candidly, but take this idea everywhere I can, because I think it would just amplify all the things that we've covered if you could go to the obvious places in the world and the not so obvious places. So imagine a school similar to the one that I'm working with, but in a village in Pakistan, or a village somewhere else, or, a city that's, similar to London, but a community within that, or a street made up of, I don't know. So I guess this is coming from 3.5 years of really putting emotion and time and, a livelihood completely into this. And I hope anyone that's listening is able to see that in the work that I'm putting out there. And if anyone is wanting to take part, they're in London or otherwise, give me a shout, send me a DM. This is the way. If I don't have people saying yes, I will just be sat here with a camera waiting for someone.
Yeah.
So there's always like an open call for anyone taking part, and there is no criteria. If you're living and breathing and you're on this earth, you are someone who should take part. Yeah. And that's why I can confidently say that I will do this forever. I've never been able to say that before, and I can say that. So get in touch.
So where let's drop that plug. So where can people get in touch with you?
I'd say Instagram would be a great one. So it's seeing the stories and drop me a DM. That's the best one. The website has a lot more of the work and some of the other work that I'm doing. So do take a look at that. I have been reminded by a few people that I need to put more of this story out there. And I think my dear friend Bavin has felt the same thing as well.
Yes.
Because we're asking others to be authentic and open with their stories, so we should do the same. So I hope this is why I kind of said to you yes months and months ago, but I thought, no, this is the perfect space because I saw my dear friend do it. So this is a start. So thank you for giving me this platform to start this, and hopefully I'll be able to build upon this and share more of behind the scene.
Totally. And when we post your episode, we'll make sure your socials are on there too, and your website, so people can easily click and get there as well. But I do encourage people to go and check out your Instagram page. There's so many stories on there that you share. You've organized really well. It's a beautiful content page. The website's really well done too. And we learn a little bit about you on the website as well. So I would also encourage folks to do that. And I think it's a great idea to be brave and reach out. Or if you know someone, maybe you don't think it's you, because most people are not going to, volunteer themselves, but maybe we know people that we think, gosh, you have a story. I'd love for you to share that. As Meg said, all ages, right? So there's lots of flexibility in their genders, ages, races, everything in between, because everybody has one thing in common, and it's their story. What about, maybe even before the call to action, like what's next? You talked a little bit about the project that's coming up. Do you have any other projects or exhibitions or anything that's coming out for you?
Yeah, so I mentioned that there's going to be a new way of sharing the stories. Yeah. That's coming in the next few weeks. So that gives a little bit more of each individual that I'm meeting and allowing their voice to be heard. So it's not just their face and the words through my text. There will be an exhibition for the completion of the 3rd century of Seeing the Stories by the end of the year. I'm working on having all of these stories. I'm alluding to a book, but maybe it's not a book. But maybe something that when I get to a milestone, there will be something that brings all these together. And that's quite daring, but I think it's one of those things you've got to put it out there.
Yes.
And see what comes from it. So obviously there is that focus of doing this project where there's, women's stories, and it's turning into a campaign. So, but for me, I think the biggest thing is continuing in the way that I am, and getting to a milestone of 500 stories on Seeing the Stories, and for it to become more of outside of London and outside of the UK. That is the aim, and I'm working on that as we speak. Perfect. So hopefully that's going to be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, we're gonna make sure that happens. The book sounds amazing. Like, to even you write little letters or little notes. It doesn't even have to be chapters, but just in a way that captures a reflective process or like aha moments for you and your clients that many of us could take. But also, I'm envisioning a beautiful coffee table book that it's a conversation starter. What's this? Hey, let's look at this story. Let's, I can see that being such a beautiful, thing that I would love. I'd be sitting on my coffee table.
Thank you. And there's a whole other space that I've not even looked into, which is revisiting people that I met in the 1st century or the 2nd century, and seeing where they are now or what came from that conversation. If anything, I will always be as humble as that maybe something came, but actually revisiting the story has evolved. What has happened now? So there is that desire to have that as well.
That'd be really cool.
I think so. Again, because there's so many varying ages, I think it will highlight, like we said, how we're all connected, how the 20-year-old is then evolved into, late 20s and what's happened since then. So that's an aim.
Totally.
There's lots to do.
You have so many little angles you can, like, you get to never say, I'm not busy or I don't have a job. Like, you have set yourself up for success.
I hope so. As long as I've got money in the bank enough to live. Like I always say, luckily I don't want a Ferrari. As long as I can have enough for a camera and a roof over my head and to be able to travel. I'm sure most of us just want to be able to do the thing we're supposed to. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the dream, and actually I'm able to do that right now. But it's kind of making sure that I'm working on these offshoots, because actually they're all connected and they're going to advance the work. So it's making sure I do that. When you work for yourself, it's really hard. You're fulfilling every role within that, but you just got to keep plowing and hoping that it works its way through it all.
I knew it with Bovin, know it with you. There's a lot of talent out there, where you guys are, and you belong to a really cool community. There's lots of creativity in there, and I think you're going to have no problem with where it's going. Just make sure you're ready to pack that satchel, because that'll be happening. What about a call to action? What is one thing we can leave our listeners with, with what we talked about? There's one thing and only one thing they leave with today. What would you want that to be?
I think it would be to share your story in any which way you can find it. Share it and be open to listening to someone else's. Because there is, from everything that we've covered, there is huge impact to be made. And your story is incredibly important. And it is incredibly special and moving and fantastic and sad and, aspirational and inspirational. So find the courage, or whatever it is, or find that safe space and share it. Give me a shout. Maybe you can share it. Share it with me. Maybe
that would be a great place.
But I think the world, certainly not to take it in a downer, the world is also a crazy, crazy place at the moment in so many different facets. And I honestly believe, as I could never understand as a kid, why we are so unkind to one another. And I stand by that now to this day, that actually if we've lived by what we've covered, is that we're all connected. I think we could actually be more sympathetic and understanding to the indifferences that are actually the richness of who we all are. Let's just take a moment, please, because the world is crazy.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be.
Absolutely. But well said. I love how you said that. And on that note, I'd like to also thank you for being here today with me, giving me this time, sharing some of your own vulnerabilities, as well as exciting me and inspiring me to get those creative juices flowing. So I appreciate that. It's a nice back and forth. I'll leave it at that, because I could keep going on and on and on about my appreciation for you and your time. But I also want to thank the folks listening. We can't have these conversations out there without your support and your willingness to take time out of your day to listen. These conversations are door openers. So if there's anything you want to add to this conversation, open the door even further, or you have some questions for Meg and I, you know where to find us with MFU. Meg has let us know where you can find her. We hope you reach out, give us your feedback. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thank you again, Meg, for being here.
Thank you. And thank you for everyone listening. And huge thanks to you, Kieran. I'm sending a huge hug.
Oh, I'll take it. I love it.